Welcome. Take a seat. Should have Okay. I'm going to talk about war a little bit, or maybe. So this session is who will win the cloud wars, and to my immediate left I have James Waters, who's the SVP of products at Pivotal, and he's the person who helped create Pivotal while at VMware, what is Pivotal Cloud Foundry. And to his left is John Engates, who is the CTO of Rackspace. He's been at Rackspace since it was a very small company. In particular, as well as being the CTO, spends a lot of time working with very large enterprise customers using the Rackspace solutions. So guys, is there a cloud war? Is there a war going on? It doesn't feel like it, but...
Well, there certainly was a war, for sure. A couple of years ago, the headlines were dominated by a price war, and I think that was sort of driven by, a way to attract new business and say that the cloud was getting cheaper every day and prices were going down every day. But the other guys in the market jumped in and said, look, we can match those prices. We can, race to the bottom with you. And so I think that there is a war, but it's changed the dynamics of the war. It isn't the same head-to-head, price competitive kind of war that we started with. I don't know, James, you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, I look at it as we're sort of in a... Is this mic?
Try this one.
I look at it as there's sort of a phase 2 of the war today, which is the original war was, hey, maybe there'll be 10 companies that look like Amazon, and today it's essentially Amazon at a $10 billion annual run rate growing at 50%, which almost no one can touch. And then 2 strategic players that say we can invest irrationally to try to keep up with, namely Google and Microsoft. And then that progression to 10 billion at Amazon has also created kind of a secondary economy of like the post-cloud world of like how do people live in that world and build a business after you already have a player of that size, I think.
Perhaps we could just contrast it. I mean, if you think about Amazon and Microsoft and Google, they're not all offering the same service. It's not now just about price. They're actually offering different things. So perhaps we could just talk about that. What differentiates those 3 players?
Now, I don't know if my mic's on. Okay, good. Well, Amazon obviously is the 800-pound gorilla. They jumped out early. They've been in the market now for 10 years. They were really defined maybe by the startup in the early days, the startups that would build their businesses and their whole companies on top of the AWS platform. They resonate with a wide swath of the market today. I mean, everybody from little companies to very large enterprises. Microsoft has always had a really strong foothold in the enterprise IT department. They really resonate with the architects and the sysadmins and the folks that have been running IT for forever. And therefore, they come at it from a different direction. They've come at it from helping companies bridge their enterprise on-premises IT to the Azure public cloud. They've also come at it from sort of the integration with other tools that enterprises use, like Office 365 and the Active Directory that's part of Azure as well. And so they resonate with a different cohort within the enterprise. Sometimes a business unit might be using Amazon where the core IT department might be using Azure. And then Google is a more recent entrant into this market. They have really strong credentials in building data centers at massive scale everywhere in the world, doing things that sometimes seem like black magic in terms of how they move traffic and move data and build servers and build data centers at tremendous scale. And they've also really been strong on machine learning. And so they've, again, come at it maybe from a different angle where they're trying to build not just infrastructure, but also a platform on top of that infrastructure. In fact, one of their early offerings was a platform as a service offer more than an infrastructure. And so everyone's got their strengths and their tools that are slightly different. But again, they're all trying eventually to go for the core of what is IT and what is the enterprise.
James, I think this leads to a situation which we might call multi-cloud, right? So large organizations are going to end up with some Azure, some AWS, probably some Google for different reasons. What are the sort of difficulties and challenges of doing that?
Yeah, I think The interesting thing for me is that there's a last mile problem between what a cloud provider will give you as an API and actually shipping code and continuous delivery. And you have two choices. One is you can say, hey, we're multi-cloud and we're going to have an Amazon operations team, and we'll have a private cloud VMware operations team, and maybe an Azure operations team. And then our posit to the market has been there could be a common layer across all of those, which abstracts them. And this is, I think, kind of the coming world because, if you look very early on in, server progression, mini computers came with their own OS and their own set of tools, and it was sort of its own ecosystem. And then eventually you get Linux and Unix where you got actually common tools across them. And I think for like the next, 3 to 5 years, we're still going to have kind of that mini computer age of cloud where they're going to all try to ship their own tools with them. But I think what's happening is the demand for multi-cloud is going to be there. And then I think some companies are going to establish themselves as abstraction layers across, all of the players.
When we were talking in the green room, you said this thing which I thought was resonated a lot, which was the cloud is how, not where. Can we talk a little bit about that? It's really about what you're doing, not where you're doing it.
Yeah, since that was me, I'll go real quick on that. I think that that's actually a quote from our chairman, Paul Maritz, who was the person that essentially created the server division at Microsoft and then, helped run VMware and then helped create Cloud Foundry and Pivotal, just to give credit to Paul. And the cloud as a how, not a where is really important because it's about like application architecture and design and automation design more than just, co-location or hosting versus on-demand rental of servers. And I think that's what makes it interesting to this conference is sort of like the internet has invaded the enterprise data center. Like what's happened is that all these scalability patterns and resiliency patterns that you learn running large-scale web, enterprise companies are now going, well, that's how we need to operate. And the internet has become the dominant design of all applications. And therefore, you can expect that design to appear in any data center wherever it's at, regardless if it's rented or not. And that's sort of what that means for us.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, that all started way back in the early days when enterprises started to adopt Linux and open source and started to embrace some of the same tools and technologies that were being used out on the web. And that has just continued to accelerate to the point where today people are even deploying private clouds within their own data centers based on the same design patterns. They're using OpenStack. Rackspace helped create OpenStack in 2010, and it was really in support of this idea that you could have the same kinds of technologies in your own facility. The where question sometimes matters to a few folks. I mean, there are people that have invested heavily in their own data centers. They don't want to throw away those sunk costs. They want to continue to utilize those things. Also, maybe geographic reasons. They want a particular location, especially with the privacy and security challenges that the companies are facing. And so, yes, they want to operate in a cloud-like manner because they feel like it increases their agility. It helps them shave off costs in certain cases, automate more aspects of IT and the software delivery pipeline, and really just make the life of the developer or the architect or the engineer a lot smoother and less pain in terms of getting access to infrastructure. In the old days, it was days, weeks, months sometimes to get access. And you probably know this well in the world of CloudFlare, but it's cloud is dramatically accelerating that, and that's why it's a how versus a where.
And maybe just one more quick thing, I think, to this kind of conference is the web companies had been the source of a lot of what was going on the internet for a long time, and the enterprises had such horrible economics of building any API or building anything because they were kind of in this old world. And I think over the next 10 years, you could see a real explosion of every company starts to really build more apps than ever.
And it's interesting you say that because I was at a private Gartner event and there was sort of CIOs and some very large firms, and one of them, who's a very, very big healthcare company in the US, said, one of the things that's happened to us is that if we went back 10 years, we had everything in our own data center, we had hardware firewalls, any mobile employee VPN'd in, we controlled it. And he said, I've now lost control completely. I've still got that. Some of those things have got web front ends on them. I've also got a private cloud deployment, I've also got AWS, and I'm using Box, and I'm using Google Apps.
Right.
And that, it seems to me that the Fortune 500 companies have exploded in terms of IP. It's sort of like, it's like a piñata, and now it's everywhere. And getting that under control seems to be a big challenge.
Well, mobile has done this to us. Mobile has destroyed any concept of controlling where we work or how we work or, what we work on. It could be a brand new device that's shipped tomorrow, I guess. Everybody's going to want to go out there and have that new piece of tech in their pocket versus the old world where, a desktop or a laptop was issued to you. Mobile has also created new business models, and I talk a lot about the Internet of Things and how businesses are being reshaped with new pieces of technology that they wouldn't even have imagined would be part of their world. Nike shoes or clothing or devices that we use in our kitchen are all now embedded with technology that is now communicating via the mobile device to the cloud and driving the need for more reliability, more scale, more security, more storage, all the things that the cloud provides. So it seems to be a natural pull when you start thinking about architectures that support all that. Machine learning is another one. You need massive scale to make that work. And where are you going to get massive scale quickly and cost effectively? Well, that tends to be the cloud. And so it's just this sort of self-perpetuating cycle that pulls people in.
Now, we're in Silicon Valley, so there's probably a lot of developers in the audience. How does a developer deal with this world that's exploded and is multi-cloud? What are the solutions for that?
Yeah, so our specialty is, we have a platform that allows you to make simple declarative operations if you're a developer. That might make sense. Where you say, here's my code artifact, run it for me at this scale on this endpoint. And then it's as simple as that, and it'll assemble everything from the framework dependencies down to the OS and scale that out and make it available in about 20 seconds. And so that's sort of like what you might call a cloud generation application server. But it turns out to be pretty powerful because what's happened is there used to be a kind of before it was easy to get a server, it kind of made sense to have this long waterfall approach to deploying and managing them because it was going to take you 8 months to get it anyway. So if you spent 2 weeks configuring it with a different team, okay. Whereas now you can get a server instantly. And so the idea is like, how do you take the developer experience the whole way to the IDE and just say, oh, just drag and drop this app and start running it? And that's what we focused on as an opportunity. And that really puts developers front and center. There's really no intermediary left between the developer and their end user.
Right.
At Rackspace, we've really tried to bring a degree of managed services and automation and tooling to help those developers get productive as quickly as they can, whether they're using a packaged system like James offers or something that they've built themselves or something they want us to bring. And, oftentimes it's, with a startup, for example, it's open source tools that they've put together from a wide variety of sources. And the hard part is, do they want to spend their time maintaining that, or do they want to spend their time writing the code that's actually going to ship and be in front of the customer, whether that be a website or a mobile app or whatever. So I think all of us, really are trying to focus on how to get those developers as productive as quickly as possible and get a lot out of their way so they don't, work in the guts of the system.
I was really struck by a statistic you came up with, which is that 50% of the Fortune 100 are using OpenStack.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about OpenStack and what are they doing with it?
Yeah, so we heard that statistic as well from the last OpenStack Summit. And if you don't know, OpenStack is a open source project, again, designed to help companies build private clouds. And I think that number, we were surprised. The project's only 6 years old, and now it's implanted in 50% of the Fortune 100. It just means that those companies are leaning into cloud. It means that they want to give their users, their developers, the access to these tools. It means they want to, again, break down the barriers to them being innovative. Innovation happens when people have great ideas and they can get those ideas in front of the customer. That's the goal. If they get stuck waiting on technology or trying to solve problems that somebody else should solve for them, it just is a waste of time. And so OpenStack, I think, it's a technology set of technologies that really give customers access to computing, storage, database, networking capabilities, software-defined networking. Security is also important in that, and all of that available now in an open source project that would mean that you're not locked into any one particular vendor or stack.
Right, right. Now, I understand that you two have customers, but the same customers, both of you, and we were sort of chatting about it.
Sometimes we cross over, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, so can you give us some, perhaps, do you have some examples of that?
Yeah, sure. One of our public customers is about 2 blocks away. It's Gap Inc. And, they're obviously a retailer that had for a long time existed on, mall space, and they increasingly compete online, and they wanted to change how long it took them to deliver software. And I think they publicly spoke at our last summit, and their quote they used was they went from 5 weeks to 5 minutes by using a Cloud Foundry layer above their OpenStack layer. And so in this case, Gap Inc. happens to get OpenStack managed on-prem from Rackspace, and a Cloud Foundry platform managed by us on-prem as well from Pivotal. So it kind of shows where Rackspace and OpenStack are providing all the infrastructure, the networks, the virtual machines, et cetera, and we're providing that last mile to developer productivity and actually essentially the application runtime and routing. So it's pretty cool. And John and I were just talking like, what can we do more? Because I think there's going to be hundreds of enterprises that want that exact same package together.
Absolutely right.
I think what's interesting about that is when people say cloud and cloud computing, cloud storage, they instantly think of Amazon and then maybe Azure and maybe Google. But the example you give there is a very interesting mixture of different technologies, right? You're talking about an on-premise solution, yet remotely managed by a company using an open source project with a layer of software to coordinate it. So as you're saying, you think that more companies will do this kind of mixture. Why are they doing the on-prem part of it?
Well, the companies that I talk to that have a preference for on-prem, it's oftentimes because they've been doing it that way for a long time. So bigger companies that have existing assets. If you're a startup today, brand new company, you probably aren't going to do an on-prem version of anything because you don't even have a data center.
Right.
But if you do have a data center, or if you're a big bank, or if you're a big healthcare firm, or you're somebody who has a lot of constraints around the where or the maybe the geography or the security requirements that they're up against. Maybe security hasn't caught up with the industry that you're in, and maybe at least compliance and auditors haven't sort of caught up with where you want to be. And so private cloud sometimes in an on-premises data center just simplifies a lot of things for companies because they don't have to battle folks to convince them that that the public cloud is safe. But in some cases, the public cloud can be safer. And there's been a lot of security talk here today. We're finding more and more customers starting to look at the public cloud as a way to improve the security posture because they know that the cloud providers, folks like Rackspace, Amazon, others, are actually able to mount a bigger and better defense against the bad guys than they would be able to do on their own. And so sometimes tapping into the physical security and the logical security that the cloud brings with it is just a big head start.
Another tactical point, having sat with, kind of some management teams at Fortune companies, sometimes you've invested $500 million into a data center and your CFO is going, hey, we're not running that. So if you go all in on public cloud, it doesn't mean we immediately get savings there, right? So there's some timing in the market as well, and the same thing goes for there's a lot of kind of databases sitting in those data centers that aren't quite ready to move. So it'll take time.
Are there regulatory things that are causing people to stay on-prem, or is the cloud ready for those regulatory environments or certifications?
Every day, the cloud is more and more ready for almost anything. I mean, the government is running more and more of their applications in the public cloud. Financial institutions are starting to move their applications there as well. There's probably always going to be certain applications. I mean, if you run a nuclear reactor, you probably want to have your apps next to your reactor, right?
Or maybe not.
Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe not. But certain components, and this is again why we talk a lot about multi-cloud. You started off talking about that, but companies every day tell me that it's not going to be as clean and simple as pick a cloud and go all in. It's never going to be that way. IT is messy. IT has always been messy. You've always had multi-vendor strategies. I think you're always going to have a multi-cloud strategy as well. And then the challenge becomes, how do you manage that? How do you keep an eye on all of it? How do you know that you're spending the right amount of money with the right provider and not letting costs run away with you? Have you optimized on the different providers? Are you taking advantage of the latest, greatest tools from that provider? Are they ready for you? Are they vetted? Are they secure? Are they reliable? So that's what we're trying to help companies navigate through, is really the idea of utilizing clouds effectively and efficiently and really getting a handle on that multi-cloud challenge.
Well, thank you very much. We've actually used our time up. We have a little bit of time for questions. So if we open it up to the audience. Michelle.
You guys work with a lot of enterprises. Which ones are the best to work with? Which ones are the most innovative, leaning in, that other enterprises can learn from?
That's a great question. I'm not going to name names. That's hard for me to do because I get in trouble every time I spit out names.
We cut the live stream at this point.
I know. Okay. Well, look, I think the companies that are recognizing that the world is changing and that they need to change rapidly to keep up, the ones that know that there is this phenomenon called getting Ubered, and getting Ubered means that you're about to be disrupted and maybe your whole industry is going to evaporate, right? And so I think companies that see that and recognize it and have invested maybe 1 or 2 times already to do something, and they're not giving up. They're continuing to pursue a strategy that will allow them to compete and thrive in that new world. Do you have any other better answer than me?
Our biggest segments right now are the people that have either the most custom software that was the most inefficient, so that's insurance and financial services. So they had, if you look at some of the large banks, they have 20,000 developers. So that's a big opportunity to get more effective and to change a lot of apps. So we're seeing a lot in insurance and financial service for that reason. And then manufacturing and industrial is going from having very few developers to suddenly feeling like they have to have great ones. So, Ford Motor Company, we did their connected car app with them. GE is another big user of ours, where they're like, we have to do connected, I call it the digital last mile problem for manufacturers. So those are 2 big trends we're seeing.
Great. I think we have time for another question if someone has one.
This question is for John. I'm curious what things are looking like for you guys, if you guys are actively pursuing government clients, like at the Fed, state, and local levels. I know there are a lot of hoops to jump through, like FedRAMP certifications, this sort of thing. So.
Government as a company, government has not been a focus of ours historically. I think potentially with Rackspace supporting third-party clouds like Amazon and Azure, it probably becomes easier for us because some of the certifications are already done by the underlying cloud providers, at least that portion of it. Historically, we built all our own data centers. We owned them, operated them. And we had to focus our energy, and typically we focused on the public sector, or the private sector, I should say, versus the public sector. And but look, I think every industry is ripe for use of cloud, and government's no different. And I think they're a little slower because, again, the legacy of building their own operations in their own data centers and the security that they required. But they're even seeing that the public cloud providers are potentially in better position to defend and secure those applications. So potentially in the future, yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much, John, James. Thank you for talking about cloud. Sounds like it's a very interesting future ahead. Thank you. Okay, guys.